Hi everyone, and welcome to the Expert Talks show. This webinar is a part of the corporate social responsibilities from Salim bin Ahmed Al Musa Enterprise. We would like to thank him for that special thanks to go to Mr. Salim Al Musa, the chairman of Salim bin Ahmed Al Musa Enterprise. And please, as always, welcome with me, His Excellency, Mr. Al Harith Al Musa, the Vice Chairman of Falcon City Wonderful, and the host of Expert Talk show, Mr. Al Harith. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jassim. I would like to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank our guests for joining us on this important topic, water sustainability, risks and crisis. We trust that through your contribution to our show, we will enlighten insights and redress information in order to minimize water challenges. In this regard, we highly appreciate your support, social awareness, and engagement by participating and building a knowledge legacy for generations ahead. I hereby express my appreciation to our honored speakers, Mr. Brian, Sustainable Water CEO. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Dean, the Water Council CEO, thank you for joining us. And my brother, Jassim Al-Bastaki, thank you for your time and effort that you dedicate for the show as part of your social responsibility. Our honored guests, your recommendations will definitely make a positive impact on the audience while promoting meaningful advice through our social responsibility platform. Once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Al Harith, all the way from Virginia, USA, through Zoom. We would like to welcome once again Mr. Brian, the President of Sustainable Water. Welcome, Mr. Brian, and we are so glad to have you today.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you today.
Thank you, sir. From Wisconsin, USA, all the way to Dubai, we'd like to welcome once again Mr. Dean, the CEO of Water Council. Mr. Dean, you're welcome here.
Thank you very much for inviting me, including me in your program.
Thank you, sir. Today, in our talks, we are touching a very high important subject. In a matter of fact, it is our life. It is our sustainability in the earth. Without, we cannot stay anymore in this earth. The matter is about the water sustain and the crisis and the risk. Yes, what are the challenges there? Is it true the water in the earth is getting reduced every year, year by year? If so, then what's the main reason? And what we need to know from the expert talks today, and how we as a human live in this earth, what exactly we need to do to sustain the water for our future generations. Therefore, I would like to start my first questions to Mr. Brian. We would like to know exactly how matter, or let's say, how the water scarcity happen. If you could just explain to us how it's happening.
Yes. Well, water scarcity results when our needs for water grow to the point where they're approaching the total limits of the water that's available to us. So for example, if our water source that we depend upon is maybe producing 100 units of water per year on average, and if our needs grow to where we're regularly using 90 or 95 of those units, then when a drought comes along and all of a sudden there is less water available, maybe there's only 80 units available, then we're going to experience a water shortage, and so we refer to that condition as water scarcity. It's the balance between supply and demand. If our demands get to the point where they're almost using up all of the supplies, then we become very vulnerable to water scarcity and water shortages.
Okay, in that case, let me move to Mr. Dean. And being as a CEO of Water Council, what are the main concern and your vision toward the water crisis?
Well, just to be able to provide you some context to where I'm located. So I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and literally I can look from the top of our building out east and can see Lake Michigan. 20% of the world's fresh water is literally at our doorstep. And so we are very, very fortunate to have that. But it's also something that we have to recognize as a precious resource, as we talked about earlier. And in fact, in our geographic area, if we were just to go a few kilometers west of where my office is, we have a water drought as well. So it's just a matter of topography and geography that we all live in sometimes very rich water places and then very water poor places. And for us within the Milwaukee area, we realize that there needs to be new technologies to be able to help to address this crisis. So it is a global crisis. And I think that here in the United States especially, we always thought of it as someplace else, and now realize that it is very much of an issue here in the United States. So we need to come up with the new technologies and the new solutions to be able to help those water intensive industries and geographies. And so we're very fortunate to have within an hour and a half drive, 240 water technology companies, some very large global companies to small companies that are all coming up with solutions around water quantity and water quality as well. And so our primarily concern is how do we adopt those new technologies that can provide the solutions that the world needs.
Dean, you are trying to highlight it or try to mention about the technology. Do you think that technology is going to resolve our water problem, or the attitude, or let's say the human, how they need to use the water in the right way or the right manner?
Yeah, yes, it is. It is not something we can just rely upon technology.
True.
It is we as humans, each of us individually have a role to manage our water, to moderate our water, how we use our water. It is a matter of business leaders on how they use it to incorporate it into their whole manufacturing or business solutions. But it's also the government's role. So we all play a very, very important part. We are fortunate that in this day and age, we have new technologies, and we need to be able to use those technologies in partnership with our own personal management approaches towards water. So it's a combination of all of it together. True.
Then Mr. Brian, my question to you, when I wrote your book, Chasing the Water, and guide moving from scarcity to the sensibility. In your opinion, what is the right methodology to overcome in the water?
Well, one of the principles that I gave a lot of attention to in my Chasing Water book was this idea of setting a limit or a cap on the total amount of water that can be utilized from any particular water source. And so the idea here is that if we can manage to limit our needs to a targeted level, that there will always be a buffer, that there'll always be some water, extra water available. And this can be challenging because the availability of water can change from month to month, season to season, year to year. So it's challenging to know how much is a safe level of use. But the science has advanced greatly, and so we're able to understand that much better. So setting a limit or a cap helps us to exceed the limits of the availability and prevents us from getting into water shortages if we can understand and manage that cap well. Another principle that I talked about a lot, though, is once you understand how much water is available for the community to use, is to find some way to come to agreement around priorities. How do we want that water to be used? What's going to be best for the society? What's going to be the most economically productive? What about the ecological systems? Are we taking care of those? Is there enough water left in the wetlands or in the floodplains and that sort of thing, or enough water for fish? So we're balancing these things between the environment and what humans need, but always trying to stay away from that limit, so that we don't exceed what nature can provide for our water supplies.
Good. Mr. Al-Harith, as you can see, Mr. Brian, he's trying to mention about the community, how to manage the water. And you being one of the real estate development or developer in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai, and developing one of the wonderful property. Is that in your development as a real estate? Are you really looking to how to manage the water, recycling the water, for example? Are you taking this initiative?
I was very interested in the part where Brian said setting a limit or cap on the use of water.
Sure.
Because Jassim, you have to be aware that there are two connections to the development. The fresh water that is being used in the households for taking a shower, your fresh water tap connection, and then the irrigation water, which is recycled from the main line of the Dubai municipality line. And believe it or not, in the summer, the irrigation water connection decreases in the bars of pressure that the water comes in with it. So, and I believe that Dubai municipality is taking such a approach to set a type of limit on the distribution of the irrigation water to make sure that it is well distributed around the city. For us in Falcon City, we have our own sewage treatment plant that we also get out of it recycled water that we also use for irrigation. So the irrigation that we use in the project first comes from the treated sewage water. And then later on, if there is any shortage, we revert back to the municipality. Mr. Brian, I'd like to ask you, how does the service provider charge on water usage? Is it a price per liter, or do you have a slab system?
Well, that's a terrific question. And many different communities are using different approaches around the world. One of the ones that I think is most interesting, and I think there's been a lot of success with, is this idea of what we call a tiered rate structure. So basically what it says is, we don't want anybody to go without water because they can't afford it, right? So you make, the initial volume of water available to everybody as inexpensive as you can, so that everybody can afford the water supply. But then as you use more and more water, then the price per unit of water goes up. Okay, so it's a different structure based on the different volumes of water use. That can be a very effective control on, certainly on excessive use, but it also makes everybody aware that additional use of water comes with a price. And if price is of concern, then you need to pay attention to that and try to be as conservative with your water as you can.
What about businesses? For example, I don't know, a fiberglass manufacturing company versus a woodwork joinery. Would they have different slabs of prices, or companies are different than households and that's it? They don't go into detail the type of business that is using.
Yeah, typically, and Dean may have known of some other examples, but I've not seen anywhere in the world yet where they go into that level of detail, where they try to discern between different specific uses of the water in business and apply different rates to that. That may be happening, I'm just not aware of it. Typically, what you see is that there will be a rate for residential use, using in the home, And then there'll be a
Absolutely.
different rate for industrial or commercial uses, within businesses. But that's typically about as far, of a differentiation as these rate structures go.
Thank you.
Mr. Dean, I was going through the Water Council, and I find out a lot of initiative that the Water Council, they're trying to address it or to bring it up. And I find something very interesting. They call it business research entrepreneurship in water. Could you tell us more about it?
Yes, and so being from Milwaukee, and really the genesis of how we became a water technology hub in the world, it really ties back to generations ago when we brewed a lot of beer. And those breweries needed to have companies that would provide those supplies to process water. And so taking off of the idea of brewing beer, what we are now doing is brewing entrepreneurs in the water technology space. And so these large companies that we have here within the Milwaukee region and across the United States are all looking for the new technologies and from the entrepreneurs. And I think that we all can understand is those revolutionary ideas need to be found across the world. They need to be supported to be able to help and grow, and to be able to pilot those technologies to move it out of the labs into real world situations. And so that's what our program does. It works with entrepreneurs truly across the entire world to be able to help them grow as a business, help them pilot their technologies, and then to introduce them into the marketplace so that they can use that technology both on the utility side, but also from the industry side. Because I think, all too often we think about water in relation to our drinking water facilities and our wastewater facilities. But one of the most important contributors to solving that problem, which we talked a little bit about, and Brian was referencing, is those industrial water users and the businesses. And the technologies by our small entrepreneurs can have a huge, big impact there. And I'm going to give you, one example of something, a company I talked to a few weeks ago that is a plastic extrusion company making products for the medical industry. They introduced a new product equipment into their manufacturing, and they dropped their water usage from 900 gallons of water a day to 19.
Wow.
Huge, huge drop. And what they said, we saw a lot of savings on our water, but most importantly, we saw huge savings on the energy bill, on their energy costs. And I think that as the earlier question is the price of water, unfortunately, water is still too cheap. But that connection between the water and energy nexus, which are reliant upon each other, that's a demonstration of how a company realized they can reduce their water bill and they can also reduce their energy bill, which ultimately has a big impact on their carbon footprint.
Dean, you mentioned water is cheap. What exactly you mean? Cheap in producing the water? Cheap of utilizing the water?
Anybody who is paying for the water, they are not paying, they're paying for the convenience of being able to bring, to open the faucet in their homes or in the businesses. But the cost associated with being able to bring that water clean and safe and treating it is much, much more expensive than what we as consumers really pay. And so there is a disconnect there. And I think, we all understand and we appreciate that water is a right that we all need and, require to survive as humans. It's part of our economies and societies, but we need to be able to adequately pay for that as well. I often talk and I can literally look out my window and I can see a river, and, I could go out there and take a bucket of water and take as much free water as I want. I wouldn't drink it at all, And so you're paying for that convenience. And so I think we do need to address globally the right price for water.
True. Mr. Brian, when I read about you, I find you that you are in the water science for over last 30 years. And I read a lot on the economy. So I would like to know from you, what do you think about economic impact of the water scarcity?
Well, when we run short of water, it has very devastating economic impacts, very devastating consequences. I think probably the best illustration of how dangerous water scarcity can be economically is the fact that the World Economic Forum, which brings leaders from all over the world together in Switzerland every year, they put out every year a global risk report that identifies what are the biggest threats in the world to the global economy. And for the last 6 or 7 years, water scarcity has been at the very, very top of that list. And that's because the economic leaders of the world are really recognizing that the impacts can be very pervasive, very damaging. You know, whether it's you don't have enough water to supply your agricultural industry, and so you lose all of those revenues, you know, from all the farmers. China and a number of other countries are having terrible challenges with trying to have enough water for manufacturing and industrial production. And the economic consequences of that are very, very large now. And it doesn't only affect the really large businesses. It can affect, you know, the livelihood of an individual farmer, or, you know, somebody who runs a small business. If they don't have adequate water to run their business, then it can be very, very difficult for them.
Mr. Al-Harith, still I would like to come up to the real estate, from the real estate point of view, and trying to highlight the water costs. Now, do you think the water costs during your constructions, it is really costing you a lot in your development? Or let's say, do you think we are here in the United Arab Emirates, we are offering a cheap water cost?
Let me tell you, first of all, you have to understand the difference between using fresh water or salty water in construction. And being in our region, very humid, so even the sand that you would like to mix with your cement formula, since we're in contracting, my father likes to wash the sand first to make sure to maintain the life of the concrete pouring later on. Because as you're aware, salt is like cancer for the actual concrete or the iron bars that are embedded in the concrete for strengthening it and holding it together. Unfortunately, there are some contractors that are going for shortcuts to save on money. If my memory serves me right, 10,000 gallons of treated water, not drinking water, but treated water, costs around
Roughly
300 dirhams. That's for 10,000 gallons.
So which is $90
approximately. And 1/3 would be the price, if I'm not mistaken, if it is for salt water. It is much cheaper. So a lot of the contractors go for that shortcut in using the salt water rather than the fresh water, because they will be saving a lot on their profit margins because of the tremendous use of water during construction. So I'm not going to comment on the actual price, if it's expensive or not, because I've only been dealing with the price in Dubai. I haven't been dealing with it anywhere else, so I cannot really compare it in reality. But I see that the shortcuts that contractors go through to try to get to a higher profit margin, it shows that it does make a big impact on the usage of water.
So I think we need, Dean, I think it must be a technology to the contractors that to use for their construction costs. So at least we can save some money or some water by using for the constructions, because as Mr. Al-Har said, from his point of view, he's trying to build a community or real estate that sustain for the long, but he's using a good water and you know, but that is that water as well is taken from the water that we need to reserve it and keep it. That will lead me, Dean, to the questions to you about what are the solution or the sustainable solutions for the water and wastewater operations.
Well, I think you're getting into something that we strongly believe and are big champions on is the simple fact of water recycling. And it makes no sense for us here in the United States when, you know, and we talk about how we're using our water, we're putting potable water you know, out into our yards and our lawns and our gardens. We should be doing, you know, the treated water. We don't do that at all for lots of different reasons. And I think that for the most part, everybody thinks of desalination as going to be the golden solution for, you know, every aspect and every place. And it is a terrific, terrific technology. But if we're going to go to the expense and the trouble of desalinating that water, what we really need to do is once that's done and we've used the water is just to keep on recycling that water. Instead of taking it, using it, putting it back into the ocean to, you know, desalinate it all over again. And this really gets into, you know, being water wise. And if we can, and the technologies exist, you can do large scale, you can do small scale, but really starting to move to this point of continuously recycling all of the water that we need to do, we can stretch out quite a bit and be very successful on being good water stewards. And that can apply to any location and any business around the world.
Brian, as I mentioned, you've been in the water science for the last 30 years. I mean, I'm sure you went through different cities, different countries. Do you think there is a city or country that are really putting an effort to prevent the water scarcity?
Well, fortunately, there are some very good examples in the world. In my work, I've worked in, you know, more than 40 different countries around the world, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, I've seen a wide range of, you know, of water use practices. But just a couple of examples. Here in the United States, we have some of our large cities have been implementing water conservation practices in a very smart and very aggressive way. And so, for example, in Texas, we have the city of San Antonio, which is really a top performer on water conservation. And again, water conservation is very, very important. When we talk about the economics of water, the cheapest water is the water you don't have to use in the first place. So to the extent that we can avoid the need to use as much water, that's really important. So in San Antonio, Texas, they have a full-time staff of more than 30 people working around the clock, working with residences, with homeowners, with businesses, making sure that they understand every possible way that they could use less water. So there are cities like that, you know, that certainly come to mind, and there are many in other parts of the world. But another important area is in farming. We've touched on this. Using water in farming is by far the largest user of water in the world. If you look at sort of the total water used in the world, total amount of water used in the United States, farming is consuming something on the order of about 80 to 85% of all the water supply. And so if you can find ways to reduce your water use out on the farms, then you can make big progress. And when I think about that, there are countries like Australia that have worked with their farmers. They're applying sophisticated technologies and meters and climate instruments to really understand how they can minimize the use of water. But the last thing I'll say is, and Dean, just touched on this, the new technologies that are emerging, like water reuse, recycling, they're going to be very important in a lot of places. And so what I tend to say is the first principle is to try to help your community use the least amount of water possible. But then if that's still more than you have reliably available to you, then let's start to talk about water reuse and recycling. And in some parts of the world, desalination makes a great deal of sense because the communities don't have another option, and they may be able to afford that extra cost that's associated with desalination. And so, as Dean said, it's an expensive technology, but in some parts of the world, it's a necessary option for increasing your water supply.
Mr. Al-Harith, do you think that we here in Dubai and the United Arab Emirates, do we really, as a government or as a private sector, do you think they're really putting an effort to prevent the water?
In my personal opinion, Jassim, I think it is never enough with regards to efforts on water scarcity awareness. We have to be even more aggressive about it. As for example, Jassim, let's take a small example over here. In our culture, in our region, when we eat with our hands. So automatically we wash before eating and we wash our hands after eating. And if we calculate the amount of water that we keep the tap open when we pick up the soap to wash our hand, and this came to mind, actually, I was invited to lunch somewhere and I saw a man as old as my father on the sink beside me washing his hand. And so, you take you wet your hand and then you pick up the soap. Before he picked up the soap, he closed the water, he picked up the soap, and I had my tap running. I felt so embarrassed, so embarrassed. So I closed my tap also. I washed my hand and I did exactly what he did. And since that day, I am self-conscious about this specific part. And then I thought, how many people have got that part of their habit and are aware about these few liters that are going down the drain without their being aware about it. Another habit, Jassim, is cold showers for a long period of time. Yes, we do have fresh water. That does not mean we have to try our music skills in the shower and go for the long songs. Well, we can really do our fast showers also. So I think it really comes down, Jassim, to households and building that mentality to our children. It is our duty to make them aware about how valuable and how scarce water is and how important for them to conserve it. Yes, it is widely available and you just have to open the tap and bring it here. But you have to acknowledge that not everyone has got this right, or I would even call it luxury. There are some countries that do not even have fresh water. And when people come and talk about charities in other countries, my main concern always is fresh water. More important than anything to do with mosques or synagogues or any religion places or even schools. Before that, fresh water, because as our religious book says, the Quran, وجعلنا من الماء كل شيء حي. Out of water we kept everything alive, or we created everything alive out of water. So it is more important to us humans than gold, in my point of view.
True, true.
Could I add on to that comment?
Please,
Because I think that is a very, very important and significant piece that you just said. We talk with a number of different international aid groups, and they talk about how they want to bring schools to people and they want to bring books to people. And we say to them, listen, the first thing you need to do, make sure they have water. And there are too many situations, too many places where you have young women, girls who are having to walk and carry heavy loads of water. They do not have the luxury of going to school because they have to move water. It's very dangerous. It's, harmful to them. And the simple act of making sure that they have fresh water will allow those, young people to go to school and to learn. So I wholeheartedly agree. First item to tackle is water.
Dean, when we get the notice from the water service provider that the connection is going to get disconnected from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m., it's like the whole world is going to end. Do we have enough water in the tank? Stop using. Do not take your showers. Don't do this. And it's just a temporary disconnection of water.
Yes.
True. Dean, Mr. Brown was trying to mention about the farming and, which is relating to the agricultures. And I'm sure the agriculture is one of the industries that most affected water scarcity. Could you, let's say, describe this impact to the crisis?
Yeah, and Brian is correct in terms of the amount of water that is being used, and it makes I scratch my head in amazement the fact that we are growing foods that do not belong to be growing in the deserts necessarily in the United States, which makes no sense to me at all, because what you're having to do is move water from someplace else to another place to really artificially support this, growth of those agricultural aspects. So we need to be able to farm and do the agriculture in a smart way where it works. But it is also the technologies that are out there and available. Here in our state, we're very big on farming, and we use these sprinklers that are just these big sprinklers and sprays the water out. A lot of it ends up going in the atmosphere and has no, real impact. Changing the practice to going to the drip irrigation. But the other thing that what we find is, and it's a very alarming situation, is the runoff because of water that does come and hit the farms and then goes into our rivers and really damages the rivers, so that downstream is impacted from that farm. So we have to look at it from such a overall cycle and a process of how we're dealing with water. So it is a very critical aspect of that water cycle of where are we putting the water, how we're using our plants, but also being able to manage the overall agricultural footprint.
Good. Brian, again, I'm sure you've been, you might be working with some governments, and if you could give us a little bit advice, or what exactly the government need to take the tools or initiative toward the water sustainable.
Yes. Well, one of the most important things is to be able to measure things, to be able to monitor. How much water is available? How does it fluctuate from month to month, season to season, year to year? And how much water are we using? So you can't plan and manage something well if you aren't able to accurately measure those things. So that's a very, very important aspect that I think governments can provide. I think that governments can also, they can really help with facilitating conversations among the water users, again, about what's the highest and best use of water. What kind of a dialogue needs to take place to set priorities for how much water is going to be used for different purposes. I think those things are very important. It's also, we just started to touch on this, but I think we need to introduce or say a little bit more about climate change, because it is having a very big effect on the availability of water. Here in the United States, in the western half of the United States, we're already experiencing declines in how much water is flowing through our rivers because of the warming climate. And the scientists, the climate scientists, are saying it's going to get worse in the coming decades. So just to give you a range of example, the projections for many of our river systems, the Colorado River, the Rio Grande River, the Klamath River, those river systems are all projecting 20 to 40% less water by the year 2050 in those river systems. That presents enormous challenges. And I think the government needs to provide leadership in how do we adjust to that? How do we adapt to that new reality? How can we make that transition? You know, particularly in these communities where we become so dependent on almost every drop that's available to us. If we're going to have that much less water, that has very serious implications. So I think those are some of the areas where the government can lead. I will also say that, that's speaking of government at fairly high levels, state or provincial or national, but the municipal governments or the urban governments are very, very important as well. And we have some very good news there. My research group has been doing a study over the recent years, and we've looked very carefully at how the total amount of water used in our cities here in the United States is changing. And I have to tell you, it's quite remarkable. And I think this is happening in a lot of places around the world. The old adage was that if your population grows, you're going to need more water. Well, what's happening in the United States now is that populations are growing and the total water use is going down. And they're able to accomplish that. And just for numbers, on average, across all the cities that we've surveyed, the populations have increased on average by 20%, and the total water use has gone down by 20%. So that's very, very good news. And the magic there is that because of all the things we're talking about today, that we have been able to help our businesses and our citizens to understand how they can use less water. And so the per capita, the per person rate of water use has gone down very substantially in many of our big cities. And that comes through the leadership of the water service providers, and it comes through the leadership of local city governments.
Brian, your
awareness, Brian?
I'm sorry. Because of awareness?
Yes.
Yes, it's a great question. It is because of awareness. It's also because of things like we passed a federal law in the 1990s that said that you can no longer manufacture and sell water guzzling appliances for the homes and businesses. Our toilets went from 6 gallons per flush to 1.5 gallons per flush because of this. So, a fourth of the water. And it had an amazing influence on water use within homes and residences. And to Dean's point earlier about water and energy, the reason for that law was not about saving water. It was about saving energy. And because they realized, to Dean's point, that our biggest energy user in many parts of the United States is the energy required to bring water to us, to clean the water, and after we use the water, to clean it up again before we put it back into the environment. So that law was based on trying to reduce energy use, not water use, but it has had a tremendous benefit on water reduction as well.
Amazing.
Brian, you're really scaring us. Look like we're going to we will within 5 decades from now we will have no water.
Mm.
You're really scaring me. But Dean,
Yeah.
you are the water council. So could you tell us, is that true? Is that what's going to happen?
Well, I think that, it's a point well taken in terms of climate change. It is, as a recent speaker that we had on our water summit, we think about climate change as this thing out there, but water, impacts all of us every single day. I look on the hopeful side is the fact that the more and the more challenges, as Brian talked about as well, that we are facing, people are getting smarter and realizing that they are part of the solution, and that some very simple, easy steps can have a big impact. And when we can experience that, see that, that's going to lead to a positive change. So it's as we started off, there's a technology component, but we as humans really need to play our part, and we can have a huge, tremendous impact that can impact every place across the world.
I'm running out of the time, but since Brian, he's the one who scared me. Brian, could you tell us the affordable way for every day for the person to prevent the water?
Mm. Yes, and thanks for asking. It is, Dean made the point earlier, it's responsible of every single human being to be as careful with water as we can. And that involves education, it involves awareness, of course. One of the things I teach at the university in Virginia, and one of the first things I have my students do at the start of the school year is to go to the internet, and there are these personal water footprint calculators where you can enter in all of your behaviors and the kind of food you eat and how much you travel and fly on airplanes and everything. And it will calculate for you, and it will show you where you're using water, how much you depend upon water. And it's a great educational experience. A lot of my students come away amazed that they need so much water, but also that they better understand things like diets. So depending upon, for example, depending upon how much meat is in your diet, more meat equals a lot more water. It can be 2 or 3 times as much to have a meat-based diet as a vegetarian diet. So the students really, they wake up to this knowledge, to this understanding. And once you understand these things, as we've all been saying, then you can take personal action, and you can influence your family and your community and your business to do a better job of it. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity. I'll close with this note. My friends ask me, how can I possibly be optimistic, knowing what I know and knowing that the climate is going to take away so much water and that sort of thing? And my answer to them is, I'm optimistic because we're managing our water so poorly, and we're wasting so much water that we have tremendous potential to do better. And I want to leave you with that positive thought.
Thank you. That's good. At least you ended with a positive news, Brian. Dean, since you highlighted and mentioned about the technology, do you think that technology will save us from the water getting reduced, or we as a human being, we must do something?
Well, first and foremost, it is we. Technology can only go so far because we as humans need to adopt those technologies and to be able to put them into place, to be able to support them and to fund them. So it all rests on our shoulders to do the right thing individually, but then utilize the technologies that are at our in front of us, and to put them to the best practices.
Thank you. Mr. Al-Harith, the last 1 minute for you before I end it.
I am by no means any water expert, Jassim, compared to Mr. Dean and Mr. Brian, obviously. But I wrote something down being a student and listening very carefully to Dean and Brian today. And I think that we are all responsible to lead the future generations to good water use habits and the awareness of climate change. If we guarantee that we do our jobs in bringing this type of awareness to the future generations and making it something right in front of their eyes, so they can address it even better than we are doing currently in our generation for the generations to come.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Harith. Thank you, Mr. Brian. Thank you, Mr. Dean. At the end, as everybody said here, we are all responsible to maintain and sustain the water with the small changes. If each one of us can do a lot of things to save the water for our better futures and for our generations, there are always a way. We just need to think, and by thinking, we will find a way. Till then, keep thinking and keep saving the water. Thank you, all of you, being with us today, and look forward to see you again. And stay safe and say yes to life and save the water. This is me, Jassim Al-Bastaki, Expert Talk Show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jassim. Thank you, Dean. Thank you,
Thank you very
Brian.
much.
We wish you a pleasant day ahead of you, and a good night, Jassim. We go to bed now. Huh?
Good night in Dubai and good day in
Thank you.
the United States.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.